done this. Burn it.
It's honoring all the dads who were part of the Greatest Generation by having an old man going to the American Cemetery in Normandy and visiting that actual site. Every time I go, I cry. I think the bookends place it in a much larger historical context and show audiences today that this really is about the old men now who were the boys then, who allowed us to have a life today the way we live our lives and to have the relative freedoms that we now enjoy. If I had to do it all over again, I'd do it the very, very same way, because I did that for the veterans. Matter of fact, it's the veterans who love the bookends because it puts it in a contemporary context. The whole superstructure of AI is Stanley Kubrick's vision. And I got as close to his vision as I possibly could, even though his treatment left out vast quantities of the story that I eventually had to fill in. It's kind of like in Jurassic Park, we talk about filling in the gene sequence gaps with frog DNA. I was the frog DNA in Stanley Kubrick's interrupted vision of AI. He began talking to me about this movie when he was going to direct it back in the 80s. And the only thing Stanley ever really actively involved me in of any of his projects was AI. He kept saying to me, you should make this, not me. This is more your sensibility than mine. Every single beat that I put in my version of Stanley's story was first in Stanley's 95-page treatment, almost in detail. I wrote the screenplay because Stanley wasn't alive to write it. And he wasn't alive to make the movie, or I wouldn't have made the movie. But those were Stanley's ideas. I don't think the mother ever loved David. David was a placebo, and the mother felt better because she was getting large doses of a lifelike boy that she could take care of and protect.
Hello, Teddy.
Hello, David.
David, Teddy is a super toy, and I know you'll take good care of each other.
I am not a toy.
Stanley intended Teddy to be Jiminy Cricket, to be let your conscience be your guide. Jiminy Cricket was always warning David of all the dangers of the human world.
You will break.
Martin, you're provoking him, okay? Stop it.
Stop it, David, stop it!
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it now! Stop it! David, stop it!
I think it's about 2 hours and 20 minutes of not child abuse at all, but questioning the audience that came to see AI about what is the difference between sentient behavior and the behavior of a doll. And where is your moral judgment going to fall? How are you going to judge creatures to look and act and behave just like us? And I think a lot of people were offended that that question was put to them. However, if all the mecha looked like panda bears and fluffy, puffy giraffes, or looked like C-3PO, there would never be a question that we would ever grow fearful and therefore hateful of them.
It's a flesh fair. They destroy us on stage. I've been there.
What do we do?
We run now.
I found when I looked at Stanley's 2000 storyboards, on the unscripted part of that treatment he did, which was the flesh fair, where David is abandoned by his mother and has to fend for himself, meets Gigolo Joe, and starts having a series of very dark Alice in Wonderland, Into the Looking Glass type adventures. To Stanley Kubrick detailed the flesh fair. It looked like a concentration camp. It looked like a death camp, with all the subhuman mechas being utterly destroyed by the bushel load, by a very terrified human race that was so afraid of losing their identities and losing their jobs, first and foremost, to a race of serving men and women that they just delighted in the inventiveness of decapitation, chainsaw massacring, draw and quartering, all of these poor, helpless mechas. And Stanley's storyboards did not disguise the fact that this all looked like a kind of 24th century Holocaust.
What happened?
I don't know.
We are in a cage.
People assume that Stanley ended AI with David and Teddy underwater, trapped by the Ferris wheel, at that end credits roll. And they're going to be down there until their batteries run out. That's where they assume Stanley ended it. And I, of course, get criticized for carrying the film 2,000 years into an advanced future where the robots they recreated have replaced us, and super mechas rule the world, and it's become a silicon-based society, no longer a carbon-based society. And they certainly assume that that's how I wrecked Stanley's movie, when in fact Stanley's treatment, along with Ian Watson, went right into the 2,000-year future. And this was where Stanley was going to take the movie had he lived to direct it. And this is where I was obligated to take the picture. And even if I didn't feel such an obligation to fulfill Stanley's vision, that would have been my vision as well. Well, I always wanted to do a George Orwell style story because I had loved 1984 when I was young and I read it. Minority Report came along. We worked on the script for a long time because it was also going to be a throwback to a film noir mystery detective story.
You know how blind I am without you.
Oh, don't cry.
So aside from all of the political parallels to the post-John Ashcroft era of how many of our civil liberties are willing to give up because the government tells us we have to in order to protect us better from terrorism in the shadow and the aftermath of 9/11, the film is totally informed by that.
Well, let's not kid ourselves. We are arresting individuals who have broken no law.
But they will. The commission of the crime itself is absolute metaphysics. The precongs see the future, and they're never wrong.
But it's not the future if you stop it. Isn't that a fundamental paradox?
Yes, it is.
So it was a hybrid movie for me about my love of film noir and at the same time, and my love of a good old-fashioned murder mystery yarn, and then all the political implications that were involved in free will and knowing what your future is, and if the government can ever get control of what you're going to do with your future, if it's going to harm somebody, does government have the legal right to literally put you out of commission for the rest of your life because of a murder you haven't yet committed, but the government is certain you will?
He's been identified on the Metro.
Look, knowledge of what's going to happen 5 minutes from now, will give you ultimate power. There is no greater power than foretelling the future with a certainty. And one of the most exciting scenes I had to shoot in Minority Report was the scene where Agatha has to take Anderton, played by Tom Cruise, through a shopping mall undetected by people who are looking for him or who may recognize him because now he's a fugitive from law. And she knows what's going to happen, so she knows who's going to recognize him from TV, who's going to drop the briefcase, where the pre-crime cops are, and how they have to wait for the balloon salesman, and how they have to wait for a convergence of a mom and a daughter wanting a balloon to happen right in front of them just as pre-crime is eyes on, and just because she can see 5 minutes ahead, misses spotting them, and they can get away.